This is Judith Lay welcoming you to Manx Radio and to the podcast of this week's edition of At Your Service.
Manx Radio.
This morning I'm welcoming back Jenny Sinclair, who joined us last week talking about her teenage years when she freely admitted she was a rebel, turned her back on the church in which she'd been raised and couldn't wait to leave home. But everything started to change when Jenny was in her 20s, and what happened next is the story we'll hear in a few minutes. But let's start with music. Roger Jones is a church music composer and teacher who first really rose to prominence in the 1970s with the easily singable cantata Jerusalem Joy, written initially to be sung by his own school choir, but which soon became very popular in other schools and churches. Now with 24 musicals published and no longer a school teacher but the director of Christian Music Ministries, Roger received in 2019 the Archbishop of Canterbury's Cranmer Award for Worship in recognition of all the work he's done using music to spread the gospel. In one of Roger Jones' collections of hymns, he took traditional hymn words and set them to different tunes. Maybe a way to make us listen a little more carefully when the tune is not so familiar.
You every morning is the love, our waking and uprising proof. Through sleep and darkness safely brought, restored to life and power and thought.
New mercies each returning day. Surround your people as they pray. New dangers past, new sins forgive. New thoughts of God, new hopes of heaven. If in our daily life our mind be set to hallow all we find, new treasures still of countless price, God will provide for sacrifice. The trivial round the common task
Will give us all we ought to ask.
room to deny ourselves a road to bring us daily nearer God. Prepare us, Lord, in your dear love.
Lord, in your dear love,
For perfect rest with you above. And help us this and every day to grow more like you as we pray.
New every morning, traditional words set to a new tune by Roger Jones. And now let's welcome back Jenny Sinclair, the daughter of Bishop David and Grace Shepherd. Bishop David Shepherd was Anglican Bishop of Liverpool from the mid-1970s onwards, at the same time as Archbishop Derek Warlock was the Roman Catholic Archbishop of Liverpool, and the Shepherd-Warlock partnership became legendary for the work that the church leaders did together, standing in solidarity with the poor and disadvantaged, working to bring peace and reconciliation to the broken and despairing community of Liverpool. But Jenny, who was at the time a rebellious 14-year-old, wanted none of this. Her father's high profile in the community weighed heavily on her. Jenny rejected the Anglican church in which she'd been raised and left home at 18. It was marriage to a Roman Catholic some years later that gently led Jenny into his church. And after a powerful experience that Jenny describes as a dark night of the soul, Jenny felt that God was drawing her into relationship with him. She explored this calling and eventually was received into the Roman Catholic Church. Here, Jenny Sinclair takes up her own story.
So I converted when I was 26. After that, I would say it was probably for about the next 22, 23 years. I just lived a quiet life, private prayer life, raised my children. I worked as a graphic designer, nothing special. In fact, I deliberately avoided working in the church because I found my father's shadow really quite difficult to live with. And I needed to plough my own furrow. So it wasn't until I was in my late 40s in 2011. So this is long after my father died. He died in 2005 and my mother died in 2010. In the January of 2011, I was getting a lot of correspondence. Because I'm the only child, I am responsible for their legacies and my father's publications and the archive and everything. And after my mother's death, there was a lot of correspondence, people saying, what's happened to the Shepherd-Warlock thing? You know, the church needs people like them now. And I was getting these letters thinking, it's nothing to do with me. You know, it started to sort of nag at me. It was the beginnings of the Holy Spirit nudging me. And I felt compelled to look at their partnership, the Shepherd-Warlock partnership, and I started by having conversations with people who had worked with them. And I was beginning to be curious, what was it about the Shepherd-Warlock partnership that made it so resonant? Why were the cities so affectionate about them? Even years and years later, you get in a taxi and if it came up in conversation, people would be very positive in a way that they weren't normally positive about the church. So I became very interested in the role of the church in society. And someone said to me, you probably ought to start a steering group or something because it's got legs, you know, this thing you're doing. And I still didn't really know what I was doing. But I did start a steering group in 2012. And then we had our first conference in 2013. We set up a website, we started a newsletter, started holding events, we published a book. And things started to take off from there. And at the very beginning, this initiative was simply to look at the Shepherd-Warlock partnership, to see what was relevant for now, to publish a book and go home. And it was meant to be a one-off project. But after our first conference, we attracted so much interest and there was so much energy around it. People were saying, what are you going to do next? We realised that we were on to something else.
The something else was a charity.
I was given the name Together for the Common Good, which is the name of this initiative, which has become a charity, in a dream. Because originally it had the most dreadful name, Anglican Roman Catholic Collaboration for Social Justice. And I was so depressed about this name. Everyone's just going to fall asleep. And so I went to bed one night and just asked, please send me a better name. And in the morning I woke up with Together for the Common Good. And through this journey, we did a lot of research on how churches work together on the ground in social action and what factors are important, and in particular what factors were important in their Shepherd-Warlock partnership. And we came up with basically 3 factors. One is they saw themselves as brothers in Christ and they shared prayer and so on, but they never broke the rules. They were both robust in their own respective doctrine and doctrinal traditions. The second was solidarity with poor communities. And the third element is the body of thinking called Catholic social thought. Some people call it Catholic social teaching. Those 3 elements seem to have made this a very important partnership. When I talk about solidarity with poor communities, what I mean by that is a church that is outward facing, that is engaged with the neighbourhood, that's not just focusing in on its own sort of private club, but feels stitched into a neighbourhood, part of the life of the neighbourhood. So those were the factors that we found. And then over time, we became a charity in 2017, and all of that has matured. So we don't refer to the Shepherd Warlock Partnership very much now, but it's still part of the history. But what's happened now is that we very much draw on the tradition of Catholic social thought as a way of reading the signs of the times. And from that, we've iterated some training, some resources, some curriculum. We have a schools programme, Common Good Schools. We work with church leaders across the denominations. I also hold public events to hold up public issues like work, economy, social peace, people and planet, to see that through the lens of the common good. What does the common good have to say about critical issues in our time of crisis? And I feel that it offers an antidote to the individualism that is really corroding our society. So it's become quite a movement that it started all those years ago. There's been many thousands of people involved. We're a very small charity, but we work in partnership with many organisations. We deliberately work relationally, and that's very important. The tradition of Catholic social thought, it's based on an understanding of the human being as a relational being. We're social beings, we're made to live in relationship. We're not meant to be isolated individuals. And so that's a fundamental, important part of it. And from that, everything else flows. And we've been in a culture that's been steeped in individualism for at least 45 years, but it's accelerated in recent decades. So our culture's in real trouble because of this philosophy that's underpinned our economy and our social life. And it's tearing people apart. So everything we do is about, for example, we encourage churches to become more relational with their neighbourhood, more outward facing, to partner with local institutions. We encourage schools to be more neighbourly with the neighbouring institutions. The classroom stuff that we do with children, we teach teachers to teach it. We don't do it directly. We train the trainer. That it helps young people see the value of relationship and the value of taking responsibility, as opposed to a language of rights, which has dominated our culture, which puts people in competition with each other. So we're trying to build back this language of mutual obligation, of community, of relationship, which has been so lost. So how do we do it? Well, over the years, I've built lots of relationships because that's how I started. Remember, I started by having those conversations in 2011, really not really knowing what I was doing, sort of following my nose. I did it for a number of years. People were saying, you have built up quite a network here. And that was simply through curiosity on my part. You know, why don't they know about this? And why don't they work with them? And how has this come to be? Because I was coming to those sort of rather established ways of doing things in churches. So I was, if you like, a bit of a disruptor. I didn't mean to be. And through that, I've made a lot of relationships across the denominations. And through that, people got to know what we were doing. And then they asked to be involved. So people tend to come to us. That we've outsourced so many things we used to do as communities. We've outsourced childcare. We've outsourced the care of the elderly. We don't borrow things from each other so much anymore. We buy them. We get them delivered to our door. We don't ask people's advice. How do you make this? Do you have a recipe for that? We look it up on Google instead. We look it up on YouTube. Everything has become individualised. And that's actually unnatural for the human being. This is where the teaching of Catholic social thought is so helpful, because it's very sophisticated around this. It's actually dehumanising for people to be separated from each other. But it also means that we're more easily controlled, that we're more easily manipulated. So when governments become more centralised and people are more individualised, it's a very dangerous state of affairs. What you want instead of that is you want a relational power to build up between human beings at the local level. This is the natural state of things, where human beings work together to sort out their problems rather than outsourcing everything to the state or buying in products and services from the market. If you go down those routes, you end up with areas where you've got nothing left but a chicken shop, a betting shop and a pawn shop. You've got no places and institutions in civil society where people can learn to be together, learn to take responsibility. It makes for a very poor and thin way of life.
But is this why we're seeing more mental health issues?
Yes, it certainly is. We find that a lot of you get spotlight on, say, suicide, a spotlight on depression, a spotlight on drug addiction or on alcohol addiction or self-harm. They're all symptoms of human distress. And in addition to that, if you think of what's happened in the last 40 to 50 years with globalisation, when we've outsourced so many of our jobs to the Far East. And you look at the abandoned towns in the UK who've had no correction in over 4 decades, no investment. There are families who've been abandoned, some of whom may have found less satisfying jobs than they had before, but many of whom have actually been on out-of-work benefits, and some for 3 or 4 generations. Now, I think that's outrageous, and I think that's completely unacceptable in a modern country. This is one of the reasons why the Shepherd-Warlock partnership was important, because their solidarity with poor communities is absolutely central, and that is, again, what Catholic social teaching says, is that the poor have something very important to teach us. Those people who are at the hard edge, they're experiencing it, they're living it.
The difference was, with the Shepherd-Warlock partnership, there was still community. The community was in a bad way, but the community was still there. They weren't isolated and living in little bubbles.
That's true. And what's really sad now is that because people have become so used to being recipients of state benefits, that's what people expect. And so they don't expect to have their own power. And this has been going on for such a long time. It's really quite difficult to persuade people back to that sense of community and responsibility, mutual responsibility that used to be the case. And this is where we think the churches and the people of the churches have a special role, because we all live in neighbourhoods, right? One of the problems that's happened in this period is that the churches, unfortunately, have become quite middle class, more so than they used to be. And I think that's one of the biggest reasons for their decline. If you look at the churches that aren't declining, they tend not to be like that. They tend to have a sense of family, they're more down to earth. There's less of a threshold to step over for ordinary families. So I always say, the first step for a local church is to recognise why you've fallen out of relationship with the poor communities in your area, because lots of churches want to help poor communities, and they often come to me and say, well, how can we engage better? We want to do outreach. And as soon as I hear the word outreach, I know that they don't have any relationships. They've fallen out over time. And so really it's about living alongside people, building relationships of mutual respect, and stopping this service provider dynamic. Because as soon as you become a service provider and the poor people are your recipients, you're othering them straight away, alienating the very people you hope to help. So really what we want is to build friendship, local friendships of people walking alongside each other in accompaniment. What we've ended up with is a welfare state system which has become very impersonal, very bureaucratic. So people who are really struggling, yes, they get a bit of cash, but they're left on their own. This is not the natural way for human beings to flourish. We are in a culture that has a tendency to isolate, to separate, and to see people as independent of each other, as if self-sufficiency is a good thing, as opposed to interdependence. And yes, it is all ages. It's actually important to remember, though, that statistically, it's the young that are lonelier than the old. The 18 to 24 age group is dramatically lonelier. And it doesn't matter if you've got 500 friends on Facebook, they're still lonelier. So we have to recognise that human beings need accompaniment, need company, physical company, not just online. This is the other thing. We're being groomed to think that living online and virtual realities is as good as a physical way of living. Well, it's not. We are embedded human beings. Yes, we're in the modern world. We do need the digital. It's fun. It's helpful, but not if the physical is lost. Well, there's another thing to say here, actually, about what politics really means. Because when we talk about self-reliance, yes, we want to encourage personal responsibility, but we also want to encourage mutual responsibility of how people can help each other, help each other's their neighbours, maybe help people they don't necessarily like, but there's a mutual interest there. They have a shared interest. How is their local community going to thrive unless they partner on something? And I think that something's been lost over time, which is a memory of what politics actually means. Politics is not really about national parties. It's about local people getting together, solving problems together and having self-determination. And I think people have actually forgotten what it feels like to actually make a difference to your own life. This is where the church can be so helpful, because the church is one of the only institutions left in civil society in which a variety of people come together across class, across background, across opinion, across age, sex, education. These are really valuable spaces, and you need to build the relationships and strengthen the relationships between those people, and then encourage them all into a relational culture. Say, well, who do you know? Who could you build further relationships with? This is how we build back the human space.
Jenny Sinclair, founder of the charity Together for the Common Good, you are deeply committed in your faith. And really, everything that you're saying is gospel teaching, isn't it? You're just putting a modern day interpretation on what Jesus said 2,000 years ago. Is this really what drives you on?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, you think about it, Jesus was a labourer in the local economy of Galilee under Roman occupation, where the Romans controlled the economy, kept the wages down, and Jesus' approach to that, what was it? He brought people together across class, across ethnicity, across age, across background, and he introduced them to the kingdom. That was his response. So it's about relational power, and it's about bringing people together in our natural human state. I mean, God made us as relational beings. That's who we are. These days, people talk about identity all the time. Our identity is actually in God, in relationship with each other and with God. So yes, what I'm doing is profoundly rooted in all of that. And for me, this is a vocation. It sort of crept up on me. The Holy Spirit sort of dragged me in. I wasn't actually sure what was going on at the beginning. I've now been doing this for 13 years. Many thousands of people have been involved along the way, and it's a very exciting space. And I think that the trouble that the West is in, we've got to dig deep. And actually, our Christian tradition has the resources, if only we would listen to what God is saying. What does the common good mean? The common good really is about building a common good between people who are different, right? Whether that's, as in the Shepherd Warlock days, whether that's between business and unions, or the police and the black community, or between Catholics and Anglicans who are estranged. The idea is that human beings should not be separated from each other. We don't have to like each other. We don't have to be best mates or anything, but we do have to rub along. We have to cooperate. We have to negotiate. We have to deliberate and to chew things over together. The message is be relational.
Giving it all to you. Giving it all to you. No more hidden agenda. Giving it all to you. Laying my burdens down. Bowing in full surrender. Kneeling before your cross. Giving it all to you. Giving it all. Giving it all to you. Giving it all to you. No more hidden agenda. Giving it all to you. Laying my burdens down. Bowing in full surrender. Kneeling before your cross. Giving it all to you. Giving it all. Lord, I'm giving it all to you. Hear us, Lord. Giving it all to you. No more hidden agenda. Giving it all to you. Laying my burdens down. Bowing in full surrender. Kneeling before your cross. Giving it all to you. Just the instruments as we pray those prayers. Giving it all to you, Jesus. Giving it all
Be
to you.
relational. That's It's the message of Jenny Sinclair's charity, Together for the Common Good. There's a website if you'd like to know more, togetherforthecommongood.co.uk. And if you missed last week's programme when Jenny was talking about Liverpool in the 1970s and the fascinating background to the partnership between her father, Anglican Bishop David Shepherd, and Roman Catholic Archbishop Derek Warlock, you'll find the programme available as a podcast at manxradio.com. Just search for At Your Service for the 10th of March. If you've ever walked along Douglas Promenade, past the Promenade Methodist Church, you've probably noticed the Cafe Lingo banner that's on the railings outside. A reminder to anyone who is new to the island and for whom English is not their first language that Cafe Lingo at the Prom Church is open every Saturday morning, offering English language teaching and information on how to make the most of Manx life, all given for free in a relaxed and friendly atmosphere. It was newly retired teacher Karen Norton who opened Cafe Lingo doors for the first time some 8 years ago, and Karen, with support from her husband Tim and a wonderful band of volunteers, has kept those doors open ever since. But change is coming, and Karen and Tim Norton join me now to tell us more. But let's begin with a reminder from Karen about how it all began.
I was aware when I was in places like Strand Street that there were people who didn't seem to be able to speak English, and they were restricted as to who they could mix with. They seemed to be mixing with the same people all the time. And I was noticing that some of them were having difficulty with shopping and things like that. And I was trying to ignore it, really, because I was very happily retired, having taught for nearly 30 years. But then at a church meeting, Elaine Christian from Trinity expressed the same concern. And after that, I thought, actually, I'm going to have to do something about this because my professional background partly equipped me for it.
Really, this is speaking straight into what church is there for. It's church out in the community and serving the community.
That's exactly it. It's identifying a need and then trying to work out what's the best way to serve people in those circumstances, yeah. But it's worked and it grew, and we have had about 500 students. And we think it's about 50 nationalities now. People keep coming back.
It is a wonderful success story. Tim, I want to bring you into the conversation now, if I may, because whilst Karen was supremely equipped here with her teaching experience, you need a lot of admin and support.
It is a partnership. You know, we work well together. Karen does the teaching and all the creative bit. I do the background support, if you like, getting things set up, as you say, the admin. And also with the volunteers as well. We have a great team of volunteers who turn up, you know, sometimes week after week.
Did you find that people came forward quite readily to volunteer?
They did, yes. We've got people from all walks of life and different religious backgrounds, and some of them have stayed with us from the very start. But we've always had a really lovely group of volunteers, and without them, it would just be an English lesson.
And it certainly isn't that.
No.
And I think there's an important point to make here, that whilst it was people from churches who saw this need and said we must respond, you always say it's open to people of all faiths and none. It's not about people's individual faith. It's saying to them, this is a service that the church is offering. And I suppose if people come and then go eventually, it's a sign of your success because you've got them feeling independent. And that's success, isn't it?
That is success. And we have had many people like that who've come for relatively short term, and that's good to see. But we've also got people who've been with us since the very beginning, and they come because they've got friends there. It's a social thing as well as an English lesson.
You let people take it in their own way. You've done a lot of preparation, but you present it in a very relaxed, informal and often quite light-hearted way. You'll bring a little bit of humour in.
We always try to bring humour in. We never know the circumstances really of the people in front of us, and we think it's important that it's upbeat. And building confidence is a big thing, so we encourage people to go and help themselves to tea and coffee. And we have activities, language activities, where people need to get up and go and talk to other people. Tim lays out the room so that it's sort of almost horseshoe shaped, so people can see each other's faces quite well. while still being able to see the presentation for the lesson.
And there's usually at least one volunteer sitting at each table with the students, so they get to know those particular people as well, you know. They build up relationships. We've had feedback that with some of the students, there's a family atmosphere. You know, they feel that we are the Manx family.
Everyone at Cafe Lingo is a volunteer. No one is paid and no payment is taken for the classes. It's all free. And after 8 years of hard work, nobody would begrudge Karen and Tim Norton a well-earned retirement. But who is going to take over?
Well, we're so lucky we have two successors. One is Sharon Sullivan-Jones. She has been a volunteer at Cafe Lingo for 7 years. She knows exactly how it works. She's already built up lots of relationships with students. And the other person is Sylvie J.L. Wilkes, a recently retired head of languages at St Ninian's School. And between them, they have complementary skills.
It sounds like a match made in heaven.
Yes, it does.
Well, it sounds absolutely wonderful. And I really look forward to meeting the new Cafe Lingo leaders. But there definitely needs to be a party for Karen and Tim's retirement. And the official handover to the new team and the farewell to the Nortons will be next Saturday, March the 23rd, in Cafe Lingo's home, the Promenade Methodist Church here in Douglas, during their SPRINGFEST morning. This is free and open to everyone. Pop in any time between 10 and 12:30 next Saturday morning. There'll be live music, dancing, food from round the world. Manx Voices Choir will be there, along with Perry Bain, Swing in the Aisle and the Rhythm of Bulgaria. And there'll be lots of children's activities too. It's a morning that mixes Manx culture and cuisine with world entertainment and food from some of Cafe Lingo's students. And it'll be a fitting thank you and farewell to Karen and Tim Norton. But Karen and Tim will be back, not at Cafe Lingo, but on this programme next week to share a poignant story that shows the deeper impact of Cafe Lingo on the lives of its students. That's still to come when we're at your service next week. And now we end with a look at our notice board and events taking place today. Bagarrow Chapel, just outside Kirkmichael, have changed their Sunday service times. The service is now at 2:30 and is on alternate weeks. There'll be a service in Bagarrow this afternoon at 2:30, led by Reverend Steve Ingrewell, and the next service will be a week on Sunday, March the 31st, which is Easter Sunday. And the Bagarrow service time once again is now 2:30. This afternoon in Kirkmichael Methodist Church at 3 o'clock, there'll be a concert of popular music by the Kirkmichael Chamber Orchestra with organist Gareth Moore. Admission is free, with an opportunity to donate to a retiring collection if you wish. Tonight, there's another Manx English bilingual service in Ballabeg Methodist Chapel. It'll be led by Reverend Dr. Janet Corlett on the theme In the Depth of Sea, celebrating those who go down to the sea in ships. It'll include special solos and will be followed by a true Manx tea. Also tonight at 6:30, the Mariners Choir will be in Union Mills Methodist Chapel and the preacher will be Reverend David Shirtliff. Of course, there'll be refreshments and community hymn singing as usual afterwards. And finally, news from Port Erin Gospel Church, next to the Catholic Church in Port Erin. They'll be holding meetings today at 11:30 and tonight at 6 o'clock, when the preacher will be Mr. Sam Houston from Northern Ireland. Sam is a gospel singer and will bring God's precious word together with a mix of gospel songs. Those are regular meeting times at Port Erin Gospel Church, and Sam will also be preaching at the morning and evening meetings next Sunday. And I'm afraid that's all that we have time for now. And so, until whenever we meet again, this is Judith saying thank you for listening, and I wish you and those you love a blessed and peaceful week and a very good morning.